because I wanted to die.
Blood pooled beneath the gallows that December morning in 1945. The rope still swayed from its last victim. 3 young women, barely out of their teens, had just met justice for crimes so disturbing, even hardened soldiers broke down in silence. But what could 3 ordinary girls have possibly done to deserve such a fate? The answer lies behind the barbed wire of Bergen-Belsen, where beauty masked something far more terrifying than anyone could imagine. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about evil. Because dangerous monsters don't look like monsters at all. However, before these women met their fate at the end of a rope, something far more sinister had already begun. Bergen-Belsen emerged from the German landscape like a cancer, spreading its malignancy across Lower Saxony with methodical precision. Initially conceived as a prisoner of war camp in 1940, it masqueraded as a legitimate military facility where captured Allied soldiers would await the war's end. The barbed wire stretched endlessly, the wooden barracks stood in neat rows, and the administrative buildings projected an illusion of order. Why did the Nazis choose this particular patch of earth? The location was strategic, isolated enough to muffle screams, yet accessible enough for the continuous stream of human cargo that would soon arrive. The rolling hills provided natural barriers, while the dense forests offered perfect cover for the unspeakable acts that would unfold within those walls. The transformation began subtly, almost imperceptibly. First came the reclassification of certain sections. Then the arrival of different types of prisoners, Jews, political dissidents, and those deemed undesirable by the Reich's twisted ideology. The camp's purpose shifted like smoke in the wind, evolving from a military facility into something far more sinister. Administrative changes masked the true horror. Bergen-Belsen was becoming a concentration camp, a place where human beings would be reduced to numbers, then to corpses. But this shift was merely the overture to an orchestra of horror.
In Bergen-Belsen, I wrote with my sister, and we wrote who will die tomorrow and who will die one day later.
The cattle cars arrived in the dead of night, their human cargo packed so tightly that many died standing upright during the journey. The screech of metal on metal, the hiss of steam, and the thunderous crash as the doors slid open marked the beginning of countless personal hells. Women, children, and elderly prisoners stumbled onto the platform, their eyes already hollow with the knowledge that they had entered a place where hope came to die. Among those who greeted these new arrivals were faces that would become synonymous with evil itself. Young women, some barely out of their teens, stood in pristine SS uniforms, their leather boots gleaming in the station lights. They carried whips, truncheons, and pistols with the casual confidence of seasoned executioners. These weren't battle-hardened veterans, they were clerks, farm girls, and domestic workers who had volunteered for what they believed would be prestigious positions in the Reich's war machine. What drove these ordinary women to volunteer for such work? The promise of better wages, certainly. The allure of power, undoubtedly. But something deeper festered beneath their motivations. A willingness to embrace cruelty, to find purpose in inflicting pain, and to discover twisted pleasure in absolute control over helpless human beings. They didn't arrive as monsters, they chose to become them. The selection process began immediately. A gesture to the left meant labor, a gesture to the right meant death. These young women made these decisions with the casual indifference of someone choosing fruit at a market. Children clinging to their mothers were separated with mechanical efficiency. Elderly prisoners who couldn't work were marked for elimination without a second glance. Yet, even this systematic brutality paled in comparison to what awaited inside the camp itself. Irma Gressy stood barely 5 feet tall, her blonde hair perfectly arranged despite the chaos surrounding her. At only 19, she possessed a beauty that might have graced magazine covers in another time, another world. Instead, her angelic features masked something infinitely more terrifying than any horror fiction could imagine. Prisoners whispered her nickname in trembling voices, the beautiful beast. What transformed this young woman into a creature of such unimaginable cruelty? Her descent began with a mother's suicide and a father's abandonment, leaving her emotionally hollowed and desperate for belonging. The SS offered her purpose, identity, and most intoxicatingly, absolute power over human life. She embraced this dark gift with enthusiasm that shocked even her superiors. How did she wield this power? With creativity that defied human comprehension. Greze carried a braided whip with wire embedded in its tip, which she used to flay the breasts of well-endowed women until infections festered in the wounds. She commanded attack dogs that would tear prisoners apart on her command, their screams mixing with her laughter. She participated in selections with the casual efficiency of someone sorting laundry, sending thousands to their deaths with a simple gesture. Her cruelty extended beyond mere violence into psychological torture that broke minds before it destroyed bodies. She would force prisoners to stand motionless for hours in freezing rain, beating those who collapsed from exhaustion. She enjoyed watching mothers choose which of their children would live and which would die. She found sexual pleasure in the absolute terror she inspired, transforming human suffering into personal gratification. The most chilling aspect of Greze's character wasn't her capacity for violence, it was her complete absence of remorse. She slept peacefully after days spent torturing innocents. She ate hearty meals while prisoners starved mere yards away. She maintained her beauty routine with meticulous care, as if the blood on her hands were merely another cosmetic to be managed. When justice finally came calling, Greze showed the same callous indifference she had displayed toward her victims. At 22, she became the youngest woman ever sentenced to death under British law. As Albert Pierrepoint placed the noose around her neck, she uttered her final word with characteristic arrogance, "Schnell, quickly." The beautiful beast's neck snapped at exactly 9:34 a.m. on the 13th of December, 1945, her beauty finally matching the ugliness of her soul. However, Greze's reign of terror was far from unique in this hellscape. Elisabeth Volkenrath arrived at Bergen-Belsen, carrying the weight of previous atrocities from Auschwitz, where she had honed her skills in human destruction. 4 years older than Greze, and infinitely more calculating, she brought a different flavor of evil to the camp.
Every day it was like the hell.
One that combined administrative efficiency with personal sadism in ways that made her superiors take notice. What set Volkenrath apart from her younger colleague? While Greze was impulsive in her cruelty, Volkenrath was methodical. She understood the machinery of death with an engineer's precision and a psychopath's enthusiasm. Her position as chief overseer of all female sections in Auschwitz had taught her that maximum suffering could be achieved through systematic oppression rather than random violence. Her methods were as varied as they were horrifying. She participated in selections with clinical detachment, sending thousands to gas chambers while maintaining detailed records of her decisions. She pushed elderly prisoners downstairs, watching them tumble to their deaths while making notes about disciplinary actions. She shot prisoners in the back for the crime of walking too slowly, then filed reports justifying each execution as necessary for camp security. But Volkenrath's true expertise lay in psychological manipulation. She would promise food to starving prisoners, then watch them grovel and beg, before denying them even water. She forced mothers to watch their children die, then blamed them for failing to protect them. She created elaborate punishments that broke spirits long before they claimed lives, understanding that a prisoner who had given up was easier to control than one who still harbored hope. Her partnership with her SS husband created a deadly dynamic that amplified both their capacities for evil. They competed to see who could devise more creative torments, sharing stories of their victims' suffering like other couples might discuss their workdays. They found romance in shared sadism, building their relationship on a foundation of human misery. When the British tribunal delivered its verdict, Volkenrath maintained her lies until the very end. She denied knowing about gas chambers, despite personally selecting thousands for death. She claimed she was merely following orders, while standing surrounded by evidence of her enthusiasm for murder. At 26, she followed Greze to the gallows at 10:04 a.m., her neck snapping with the same mechanical precision she had applied to human extermination. Despite these individual horrors, the worst was yet to come. Johanna Bormann shuffled through the camp with a pronounced limp, her small frame belying the monstrous capacity for cruelty that earned her the nickname, the woman with the dogs. At 52, she was significantly older than her fellow guards, bringing decades of bitterness and frustration to her role as an instrument of Nazi terror. Her age, however, only amplified her viciousness. She had less time to enjoy her power, making every moment of cruelty count. What drove this seemingly insignificant woman to such depths of evil? Bormann's life before the camps had been one of invisibility and poverty, working in an insane asylum for pittance, ignored by society and forgotten by history. She found in the SS the recognition and authority she had always craved. The uniform transformed her from nobody into somebody who mattered, someone who held life and death in her weathered hands. Her specialty was weaponizing the bond between human and animal into something twisted beyond recognition. She trained her dogs not merely to attack, but to understand the nuances of torture. They would bite just hard enough to cause agony without immediate death, prolonging suffering until she decided it was time to finish the job. She found particular pleasure in setting them on menstruating women, watching as the animals tore through flesh, while she commanded them with hand signals and whispered commands. But Bormann's creativity extended beyond her canine accomplices. She forced prisoners to fight over scraps of pig food, then beat them for stealing when they tried to survive. She made pregnant women crawl through mud while she rode her bicycle alongside them, using her whip to maintain the pace. She pushed children into cesspits and watched them drown in human waste while their mothers screamed helplessly behind barbed wire. Her psychological profile revealed something even more disturbing than her actions. She genuinely believed she was performing a service. In her twisted mind, she was cleansing the world of impurity, one torture session at a time. This wasn't random cruelty. It was a mission she pursued with religious fervor, finding divine purpose in human suffering. Justice came for Bormann in the form of Albert Pierrepoint's rope. At 52, she limped to the gallows trembling with fear, a stark contrast to the terror she had inflicted on countless innocents. Her final words, "I have my feelings," rang hollow after decades of showing no consideration for others' feelings. She was executed at 10:38 a.m., the third and final woman to hang that December morning, her small body finally paying the ultimate price for her monstrous crimes. Nevertheless, even she faded in comparison to the kitchen's angel of death. Before we go further into this descent, if you want to keep uncovering hidden stories like this, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss the next time we drag another piece of forgotten history into the light.
We get food only from human meat.
Irene Hashke had spent most of the war working quietly in textile factories, her hands skilled at creating rather than destroying. At 23, she possessed the unremarkable appearance of countless German women: brown hair, average height, forgettable features that would blend into any crowd. But beneath this ordinary exterior lurked something that would make her name synonymous with casual evil. What transformed this factory worker into an agent of starvation? The kitchen of Bergen-Belsen offered her something she had never possessed before: absolute control over the most basic human need. She could grant life through sustenance, or condemn souls to slow death through deprivation. This power intoxicated her more thoroughly than any drug, turning meal service into elaborate torture sessions where she held court over the desperate and dying. Her methods were as simple as they were devastating. She would deliberately spill soup rations, watching prisoners weep as their only meal of the day soaked into the dirt. When they begged for replacement portions, she would beat them with rubber sticks until they collapsed, then deny them food for days as punishment for complaining. She took sexual pleasure in watching emaciated prisoners fight over scraps, their humanity stripped away by hunger she had deliberately intensified. But Hashke's cruelty reached its peak in the drowning incident that would seal her fate. When a prisoner approached the water system seeking relief from thirst, Hashke pushed her into the cistern and held her down until the bubbles stopped rising. She then forced other prisoners to fish out the corpse and bury it, threatening them with similar fates if they ever mentioned what they had witnessed. The casual nature of this murder, committed not in rage or panic, but simply because she felt like killing someone, revealed the complete absence of humanity in her soul. Her defense during the trials was as pathetic as her crimes were heinous. She blamed male supervisors for her actions, claimed she was only following orders, and insisted she had never hurt anyone intentionally. But the testimony of survivors painted a different picture. A woman who found joy in human suffering, who created elaborate scenarios to maximize pain, and who slept peacefully each night after days spent torturing innocents. The tribunal showed Hashka more mercy than she had ever shown her victims. Despite the drowning and systematic starvation she had orchestrated, she received only a 10-year prison sentence. She walked free in 1951, vanishing into obscurity with no known family or permanent residence. The British authorities' notorious failure to track released Nazis allowed this architect of suffering to disappear into the shadows, carrying her secrets to an unknown grave. Perhaps her escape from true justice crumbled beside another guard's twisted methods. Herta both arrived at Bergen-Belsen through a different path than her more infamous colleagues. Conscripted through the labor exchange rather than volunteering, she initially maintained the facade of reluctant participation. At 24, she possessed an unremarkable appearance that masked the capacity for cruelty she would soon discover within herself. What made both particularly dangerous was her ability to appear sympathetic while orchestrating suffering. She worked in the bathhouse, forcing naked prisoners to endure ice-cold water in freezing temperatures. When they failed to dress quickly enough after their torturous baths, she would beat them mercilessly with wooden sticks as they stood wet and shivering in the snow. She found particular pleasure in this combination of humiliation and physical agony. Her specialty was the wood commando, where she supervised prisoners gathering fuel for the camp. She would shoot at them for sport as they carried their meager food rations, treating human lives as moving targets in a twisted game only she understood. When she caught prisoners stealing scraps of wood to warm themselves, she would beat them to death with blocks of timber, then order other prisoners to dispose of the bodies. One survivor testified to watching both beat a Hungarian Jew named Eva to death with a piece of wood, for reasons that remained unknown. Another witnessed her shoot 2 prisoners in the back as they walked away, their only crime being too slow to satisfy her sadistic whims. The randomness of her violence made her even more terrifying. Prisoners never knew what might trigger her explosive rage. Justice proved more lenient with both than with her executed colleagues. The tribunal sentenced her to 10 years in prison, but she served barely half that time. Released on the 21st of December, 1951, she walked free after witnessing and participating in some of the most heinous crimes in human history. Like Hashki, she vanished into post-war Germany, her fate unknown, and her conscience apparently unburdened by the screams of her victims. However, even her random violence couldn't match the calculating evil of another. Herta Ehlert entered the Nazi concentration camp system through conscription rather than choice, initially working as a bakery assistant in Berlin before being called to serve the SS. Her case demonstrated how seemingly innocent individuals could transform into instruments of death when placed within the machinery of systematic murder. What distinguished Ehlert from her more openly sadistic colleagues was her voyeuristic approach to cruelty. She would spy on Jewish women through small windows as they worked in the kitchen, peeling potatoes and washing dishes under her watchful gaze. This surveillance became a form of psychological torture, as prisoners never knew when they were being watched or judged. Her style evolved from observation to active participation in abuse. She would order kitchen workers to strip completely naked, then conduct thorough searches of their bodies under the pretense of looking for contraband. These searches were deliberate humiliations designed to strip away the last vestiges of human dignity from women who had already lost everything else. The stolen valuables she discovered during these searches, rings, watches, hidden money, disappeared into her possession. She transformed survival into theft, criminalizing the victims' desperate attempts to preserve some connection to their former lives. Each confiscated item represented another step toward complete dehumanization. Despite her crimes, Ehlert received a relatively lenient sentence of 15 years in prison. Her punishment was later reduced to 12 years, and she was granted early release on May 7, 1953. She had served barely half her original sentence before walking free, having completed less time than many common criminals serve for far lesser offenses. The justice system's failure to adequately punish her crimes allowed another architect of suffering to escape true accountability. Unfortunately, the liberation of Bergen-Belsen would reveal horrors even more shocking than these individual monsters. British forces arrived at Bergen-Belsen expecting a routine transfer. Reports had mentioned typhus, overcrowding, administrative issues. Nothing prepared them for what waited behind those gates on the 15th of April, 1945. The stench struck first, decay so overwhelming that hardened soldiers vomited before seeing the source. Inside lay a vision of hell. 60,000 prisoners clung to life in conditions worse than death. 13,000 corpses littered the grounds like discarded trash, limbs falling apart at the touch. Children wandered among the dead, too weak to weep, too broken to respond. The living were skeletons, their sunken eyes hollow reflections of unspeakable torment. The British had fought across Europe, seen war's brutality, yet nothing compared to this. Survivors pointed out their tormentors, women who laughed, denied, or complained even as corpses rotted around them. What stunned the liberators most wasn't only the horror, but the complete absence of remorse. Consequently, justice would finally have its day. The courtroom in Lüneburg filled with witnesses, survivors, and military officials as the Bergen-Belsen trials began. For the first time, the world would see war criminals judged not by ideology, but by evidence, film, testimony, and memory. The female guards sat in civilian dresses, appearing ordinary, until survivor after survivor pointed them out with chilling certainty. Cruelty now had a face. Unlike Nuremberg, these proceedings were intimate. They were not about abstract politics, but about victims confronting their tormentors. Every story pierced the air: starvation, beatings, executions. The guilt was undeniable, the verdicts inevitable. In Hamelin prison, the condemned awaited justice. Their cells were small, their days silent. They wrote letters that were never sent. They prayed, perhaps, but not for forgiveness. No remorse ever passed their lips. Albert Pierrepoint, Britain's executioner, prepared the gallows. A man of precision, he measured heights, tested ropes, and readied the trapdoors with cold professionalism. On the 13th of December, 1945, the ritual began. At 9:34, Irma Grace walked calmly, blonde hair immaculate. She asked for speed. A moment later, the beautiful beast was gone. At 10:04, Elizabeth Volkenrath still denied knowledge of the gas chambers. The rope cut short her lies. At 10:38, Johanna Bormann trembled, whispering, "I have my feelings," a cruel irony from the woman who loosed dogs on children. The trap fell. Rope after rope swayed. By day's end, 10 more joined them. Justice did not bring back the dead, but it marked the living. Evil would not go unanswered.
The women would get blankets and some sort of old dress to wear, and maybe clogs, and we'd go into barracks and sleep on the floor with lice, with fleas, with rats, with every kind of dirt you can possibly imagine. Every day, hundreds of people died. The women would take their blanket, put a body into the blanket, and throw the body out. When you read Eicha, and you read about dead bodies all over, this is a picture of it many thousand years later.
Bergen-Belsen's barracks burned, but memory did not. Survivors' voices, photographs, and testimony endure. The gallows of Hamelin remain a warning. Ordinary people can choose monstrous paths, and when they do, justice will find them. Now we want to hear from you. What shocked you the most about these women? Was it their cruelty, their lack of remorse, or the world's failure to hold some of them accountable? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'll be reading every single one.